Yeah, let us get started. Well, hello everybody, and honestly, I can't believe it's been 7 weeks since we've started this webinar series, and we've very much enjoyed it. And I do hope, and all do hope, that you've also not only just enjoyed the series, but also benefited from it as well. But in Subukra tomorrow, we have a session at 4 o'clock, another one at 5:30, and then we will wrap up on Friday by yet our last session at 4 p.m. Today, guys, our topic pertains to children on screens, and I think this is a problem we all suffer from. مش بس children. I think نحن ourselves we spend too much time on those LED screens. And our speaker for today is Dr. Abeer Hani, who is a clinical assistant professor of pediatrics and neurology at LU Gilbert and Rosemary Chagoury School of Medicine, as well as LU Medical Center Hospital. Now, Abeer has expertise in pediatric neurology and epilepsy and intraoperative monitoring as well. Abeer did her fellowship in child neurology at Duke University in North Carolina, and she followed that by her fellowship in clinical neurophysiology, epilepsy, and of course, intraoperative monitoring. Now, currently, Abeer is the director of the pediatrics residency program at the URSA Hospital. And to delve into our topic for today, I think, as I've already mentioned, there's too much social media nowadays, too much mobile phones, or we spend too much time on our mobile phones, on interactive media, on video games, on televisions, not just ourselves, but obviously our children as well. And they're exposed to these harmful screens, if I may, for long enough. Now, according to Abeer and to many of us as well, excessive media can cause social damage, emotional damage, and more importantly as well, or just as importantly, cognitive problems as well. And the aim of this webinar is to simply discuss the appropriate amount of supervised screen time that can be recommended for each age group among children, and hopefully Abeer will be able to also recommend some appropriate time, مش بس للchildren لنا نحن كمان لأنه بعتقد نحن as well we are children in our own way. So Abeer, I think the virtual floor is all yours, and do remember everyone, and you can make use of the chat box and the Q&A on the site. Abeer, wanna take over?
Yep. Thank you, Dr. Talib, for your kind introduction and for your very appropriate remarks. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you all for joining us on this webinar. I think this is a great step, and everything in life has positives and negatives. And I think one of the positives that Corona pandemic brought is us getting together in these informative webinars, LAU Knowledge Unlocked webinars. And the topic I would like to discuss today is a topic that is very interesting to me, a topic that we're trying to research a little bit in Lebanon, given the little research on it that is present, and a topic that is actually very pertinent to all of us and to our everyday lives. And Dr. Talib rightfully mentioned that not only children suffer with watching too much screens or using screens excessively, but we as adults as well struggle with our own problem with that as well. Although we'll focus on children and adolescents in this talk or in this webinar, what we discuss applies also greatly to older population as well. Please feel free to leave your questions in the chat or Q&A during the webinar. I'd like this to be as much as an interactive webinar as possible. I promise not to have too much information or slides. I know it's 4 p.m. and some of you have already resumed their jobs or their work, and they may be a little bit tired at this time of the day. So we'll try our best to make this as easy and as straightforward as possible. I will go ahead now and share with you the slides that I have prepared for this regards. So please let me know if you have any issues with accessing or seeing the screen or the slides that I am projecting at this time. Okay. So The title of this webinar is Children on Screens and How Much is Too Much. And by this title, I mean, is there a time limit that we should allow our children to use screens or to use tablets or other media forms? I do not have any conflicts of interest pertinent to this talk. And what we will try to do together is to go through an overview of the types of screens or media that exist nowadays, give you some statistics about media use in children, and most of the statistics comes actually from the United States, where the biggest amount of research has been done and is still ongoing. Then we'll discuss whether there are any effects of excessive screen use in children, and I will be using the words screen or media interchangeably, and by that I mean any electronic or digital or technology whereby there's a screen and something gets projected on the screen and children can watch it. Then we'll go over the recommendations of the American Academy of Pediatrics about the appropriate amount of screen use in children and adolescents at different age groups. And finally, which I think is the most pertinent and what you want to know, is what should I do as a parent or a caregiver, and how do I take care of my kids in this very digital world? So as you can tell, and as you've already noticed, we have a lot of screens now are going around. So we have televisions that have been there for several decades now. We have video games, smartphones, tablets, laptops, desktops, Blackberries, wearable watches, and maybe some of you can name some other screens as well. So we have a wealth of screens, a wealth of digital technology that's floating around us. And if each one of us stops and pauses and thinks, how many of these screens do I have at home? So most of us have at least one television at home. Most of us do have access to video games, be it separate PlayStations or even video games on your laptop or desktop. At least there is one, two, or depending on the number of family members, there are one or two smartphones in the family. Tablets can be present, plus or minus. Almost all homes now have desktops or laptops because of the need to use them in school and and at work. Blackberries were famous and favorite at some point in time. Maybe now they're falling a little bit out of favor. And wearable watches are now as well being more and more bought and used. So many of us have at least 3 or 4 forms of screens or media that they can use, they have access to, and they can use permanently. And this applies to adults or children living in a household. So what statistics do we have about the amount of screen use in children? So it's interesting how the evolution of the screen time has been. So in 1960, there has been a comparative study that compared screen use in 8 to 18-year-olds between 1960 and 2010, meaning 50 years apart, in a 50-year gap period. And so in 1960, the amount of time spent in front of a screen was 15 hours a week. And 15 hours a week. So during the whole week, only 15 hours the child would spend in front of the TV, and only the TV was the media option that was available at that time. Compared in 2010 to 75 hours a week. So more than 6 or 7 times more what used to happen in 1960. And now we have access to TVs, computers, handheld devices, etc., in the same, for people of the same age group. So that's a really tremendous increase. That's really a tremendous increase in the amount of screen time that is spent. I know that one of the attendees is having trouble hearing me. I can see that in the chat box, and I want to make sure that this is not a common problem. I don't think there's been any change on my part, but I want to make sure that the rest can hear me well. Okay? And I hope that if this is a glitch, it gets fixed quickly. So continuing with some of the statistics, we know that in the United States, in the age group of 8 to 12 years, now children are using these screens for an average of about 4 hours and a half or 5 hours a day. And this was actually in a report issued in October of 2019. And I think numbers are changing fast and different studies are finding different numbers. Whereas in 13 to 18-year-olds, they spend an average of 7 hours and a half almost using the screen each day. So these are not really, these are not insignificant numbers. These are significant, this is a significant amount of, actually of screen time that's being spent per day. Now, why do we think this is happening? Because now we have a lot of access to portable screens, okay? And by portable screens, I mean phones, smartphones, tablets that are easy to carry and to move around from one place to another. And there is a very fast adoption of the digital technology nowadays. And so I want to stop a little bit at that point, the adoption of digital technology. So when people did research and studied how fast the different technologies have been adopted, what was found is that, so the TV took about 30 or 40 years to be adopted pretty well. And adoption, when defined in economics or in marketing, is defined as having the item being bought by, let's say, 50 million consumers. So it took some time for the TV to gain momentum. And then compared to the internet that took only like 3 years to be adopted, iPhones, for example, like 2.5 years. And then very lately, iPads or tablets are taking like within probably months' time to be adapted. So we have very fast adoption of digital technology nowadays. And that adds to us having more access to these screens and to portable screens and using these screens more and more often. So, So why is it a problem if children have excessive screen use? And at this point, I will venture and try to see. Hopefully, you'll be able to watch this video as well. And I've included the link on YouTube. It's an NBC put together small 2-minute video that shows us how screen use can be sometimes, not always, can sometimes be a problem in children. Please let me know if you have issues with accessing, with listening or following up the video very well, and I'll leave the link to the YouTube later on.
Abeer, أنا just sorry, I want to come in for a minute. يمكن ما يقدروا participants to hear your video. So if you try to play it and you find out that they are not able to hear it, so perhaps we could just get, and we've had similar problems previously, okay? Okay, sure. Yes, I will be posting the link in the chat just later on, because so that I do not log out of the presentation. Okay, so let's Mike. Yeah. If we can hear it. Yes.
Let me just. 98% of American homes with children now have an electronic mobile device. And on average, kids 8 and under spend more than 2 hours a day looking at a screen. Is that too much? Or could there actually be developmental benefits to screen time? This is Your Brain On, where we explore how the world affects our brains and ourselves. Young brains need a lot of external stimuli to develop, particularly from birth to age 3, what's known as the critical period. It's during this time that children's neurons are making connections for fundamental skills such as vision, hearing, and language. But these needs are based on centuries of human evolution, which used to have nothing to do with screens. Consider a child watching a video instead of listening to parents read a book. It's a far different experience for the brain. Rather than kids learning to focus and imagine the story, the device presents everything to them, so certain cognitive systems become underdeveloped. And when children spend too much time in front of a screen rather than interacting with people, they can have stunted development of the frontal lobe, part of the brain that decodes social interactions. It can become more difficult to develop empathy or learn social cues like facial expressions. What's more, the stimuli from a screen can be a lot. Colors, sounds, stories, all at a super fast pace. That can be sensory overload, releasing stress hormones such as cortisol. It can also overactivate the brain's reward systems, like the addictive hormone dopamine, getting kids used to immediate gratification they wouldn't get in the real world. So most scientists and doctors agree that screen time can alter young, still forming brains, but but in some ways, that change can be positive. Take the results of one recent study that exposed young mice 6 hours daily to audiovisual stimuli similar to those found in a video game. After 10 days, the mice showed signs of hyperactivity, impaired learning, and risk-taking. But the mice also stayed calm in an environment that usually would have stressed them out. Some scientists now argue screen time can help prepare a child's brain for our increasingly fast-paced, high-stimulus world. So, screen time isn't always bad, and it isn't all created equal either. An educational letter matching game isn't the same as a violent movie. As with many things, the key is moderation, limiting daily screen time and making sure the child can function in all of modern life, not only with screens, but in the real world too.
Okay. Well, I hope you were able to listen to the video, but I'll summarize some of the, actually some of the contents or some of what was mentioned in the video, just in case it kept breaking up, because I know sometimes the connection can be problematic. So basically, we know that early on in life, especially the first 3 years of life, but later, but also during childhood, we have a critical period during which the brain is developing fast, is making connections. We call them interacting. Neurons tend to interact at synapses. We need to well develop these synapses so that the child can function properly, can learn at school, can be more effective, can have the curiosity, creativity, imagination that we want. And we would not want our kids during that period to be exposed to a lot of screens that decrease their ability to imagine, to be creative, to interact with the world around them, to learn about the world using all their senses. So that's why it's very important to be careful about screen use. Screen use isn't all harmful, so sometimes we can use screens and they can be educational, they can be helpful, they can be a source of entertainment, but the key is balance, as mentioned in the video. So that's in a nutshell what the video tried to tell us. So as you can guess, based on what we've mentioned before, and based on my experience as well as a pediatric neurologist in clinic, who tends to see a lot of kids who come with problems with delayed language, so kids who are delayed to speak or to interact or who don't have good eye contact yet. Many times when we dig, we find that some of the reasons include excessive screen time. So when kids are exposed to excess screen time, they tend to have poorer vocabulary, fewer language skills, less reading and comprehension skills. Their sleep tends to be more disrupted, and they tend to, especially when they're sedentary and they don't have a lot of activities, they tend to develop obesity or overweight. They can have eye strain issues. And sometimes when they are exposed to repeated violent content, they can develop violence as well. So it's very important that we are careful about our children manifesting some or all of these signs. And consequently, it is very important for us to set limits on media use in children so that we can avoid having kids develop these problems. And so when we set limits, studies have shown that kids who have strict or more controlled media use tend to have better school performance, tend to feel more happy, tend to have more ability to concentrate and solve problems, tend to display more compassion, better imagination, curiosity, creativity, and they tend to learn about the world around them using all their 5 senses, not only listening or being passively watching a movie or so. So that's why, given all of these, we think it's very important that as parents and as caregivers and as pediatricians or pediatric neurologists, we need to counsel our families about the importance of limiting the use of screens or media in children and in adolescents. So moving forward, we're going to start with the recommendations of the American Academy of Pediatrics at different age groups. And I want to tell you that the WHO, the World Health Organization, has also come up with very similar recommendations as well. So we can, it's either or as far as the recommendations set by these two big organizations. So between 0 and 18 months, meaning up to 1.5 years of age, it's recommended that kids get exposed to 0 screen time, except for video chat with loved ones. Studies have shown that when they chat with loved ones, even though there is some downside to them being exposed to the screen, the benefits tend to outweigh the risks. Now, why do we think this is very important? It has been found, studies have found that kids tend to, children at this age tend to be at a very critical age acquiring their speech and their ability to interact and to speak and to pronounce words. And kids learn best, or children, very young children, learn best when they see the actual 3D movement of the lips and the mouth. That's how they learn to pronounce and move their lips and move their mouths. And that's why when they watch a screen which is only two-dimensional, that kind of hinders their ability to learn how to pronounce and to use words. That's why it's preferred that they don't get any screen exposure and that you spend this time instead talking to them face-to-face in person. I know it's very hard for a lot of people to achieve that. At the end of the day, we have, as whether you're a stay-home mom or dad, or whether you leave your kid with grandma or nursery, sometimes it's just that you need to fill the time in the day and you need them to settle down a little bit so that you can finish some of your chores. And I understand that. But the recommendation is to try as much as possible to minimize as much as possible screen time in children before 1.5 years of age. And that means that you need to spend that time. So if they cannot watch screens, you need to spend that time reading to them, playing with them, interacting with them. So that can be really a challenge. But ideally, that's the best thing to achieve for a kid who is less than 1.5 years of age. And I know that some of you may have some input or some remarks, so feel free to leave them now or later on at the end of the presentation, where we'll have hopefully plenty of time to discuss things. Moving on, what do we do between 1.5 years and 2 years of age? So at that age group, it is recommended to spend less than 1 hour with the parent viewing together with the child, with no solo media use. So you can still avoid screens up until 2 years of age, but if you feel like you want to introduce it, you want to introduce them to some educational videos, some really fun cartoons, kids are really, you see that your kids are really asking for screen use, then you have to make sure that you're watching with them and you have to limit it to less than 1 hour per day. I'm sorry, I didn't mention that, 1 hour per day, okay? Now, between 2 and 5 years of age, it is recommended to have only 1 hour per day of screen time, okay? And even this 1 hour per day needs to be controlled and needs to be supervised. You need to avoid fast-paced programs because kids cannot keep up with fast-paced at this age. You want to avoid any violent content. And you need to be very careful because I know that we tend to use YouTube a lot for kids. There are lots of cartoons, lots of programs that are ideally intended for children. However, what we are finding repeatedly is that some of this content is actually not child appropriate. And there are some ads, advertisements that may be inserted within the cartoon that are not age appropriate. So you need to make sure to watch, to co-watch with them what they are watching, or you need to watch the program ahead of time, download it, and have it ready for them to watch when they need their screen time. It is very important to turn off all televisions or other devices when not in use. Some of the main problems I see as a physician in clinic is that parents come to see me, the kid is having some trouble with a language, with talking appropriately for his age, or with establishing eye contact or having conversations. And one of the common things that I get is that, well, the TV is on since the morning, but the kid doesn't like to watch TV. So he doesn't watch a lot of TV. I mean, he watches a little bit, goes to play, comes back, watches a little bit, and so on and so forth. But the TV is on all day long. Well, that's not very helpful, and that's not very good, because as you all know, once we have something playing in the background, the television, something else, our interaction, our ability as parents to talk to the kids decreases a lot, because we are listening, or we know that there's somebody else speaking in the background, and so we tend to interact less and talk less to the child. So it's very important to turn off TVs and devices when not in use. And one other thing that I see frequently being used as a clinician is using the media to calm the child. And for all of us who have children, we know that children can be a handful sometimes, and you're exhausted, you're tired at the end of the day. And the last thing you want to do is hear a child scream endlessly until you give him the phone, your phone, or some other tablet to calm down. But media should not be used as the way to calm your child consistently, always. So we tend to be okay with using screens or media to calm your child when you're on a flight, when you have a special occasion maybe, when you're doing a certain procedure, medical procedure. You can give them the screen to watch something they enjoy for a short period of time, but it shouldn't be used consistently to calm your child or to help your child, for example, eat. I have parents who tell me that, well, my child won't eat unless distracted, and so I put the tablet on for an hour during breakfast, and then during lunch, and then during dinner, and that's not the best way. We don't want to link screen use to certain habits that the child should be able to do without using the screen. So this can be delicate, this can be serious, and if you're having issues with that, you need to discuss them with your pediatrician or a pediatric neurologist. It's important, as we mentioned before, to monitor the content, the media content. It's not enough to see a label that says cartoons or designed for children or whatever other labels you may get. It's important that you know what the content is and whether there are any inserted content or any advertisements that are being run during the content. Very important is to keep bedrooms, meal times, and play times screen-free. So it's important to set limits, it's important to establish rules and to stick to these rules. And when we say sticking to these rules, it means we as adults and as parents, we need to stick to these rules. So during meal times, we need to put our phones away. At bedtime, we need to make sure there are no televisions or screens in the bedroom. Similarly for playtime, when it's playtime, we have to put screens away. And I always recommend my patients for different age groups, adults, peds, children, whomever, whatever age group, is that there should be no screen use 1 hour before bedtime. And the reason for that is because screen use immediately before bedtime can delay sleep and has been shown to interrupt sleep as well in people of all age groups. Okay, so that was 2 to 5 years of age. Between 5 and 13 years of age, it is recommended to have 2 hours per day of screen time. But these are not like, you want to be a little bit careful about allowing for this amount of screen time. And I know that if you ask our parents in the group, in this group or in other groups, I mean, 2 hours per day seems to be ideal and so great. Most of our children, especially in lockdown now, tends to spend a lot more than 2 hours per day on screen time. So we need to counsel them about what the right time is and make sure we approach that recommended screen time as much as possible and as often as possible. So we need to set a family media use plan, and I'll discuss this a little bit in more details in a bit, meaning you need to sit with the child or the adolescent and discuss with them what type of media or screens they want to use, when will they be using them, and kind of have a plan for that. We need to advocate having physical activity at least 1 hour per day, along with adequate sleep, 8 to 12 hours per day, per night, depending on the age. Again, we should not allow for screens before bedtime and remove devices from bedrooms. No TV in the bedroom. There's no reason why a TV should be in the bedroom. There's no reason why a laptop or Well, a laptop usually can be in the bedroom, but you want to make sure it's not being used at bedtime. Tablets, phones, etc., tend to be more of an issue. I have many of my kids who come to see me in clinic tell me, but I need to charge my phone at night, and I discuss with the family that we need to have a charging station outside of the bedrooms. The phone can be charged definitely outside of the bedroom and not next to the kids' bed. We need to discourage media and entertainment, especially media, while doing homework. I know that some of the homework now, if not all homework, if not all homework, we need to, if not all, at these days, most of the homework is done actually online. And so entertainment should not be, entertainment media should be avoided while doing it. We need also to, as we mentioned before, have media-free locations. Bedrooms should not have screens, and we need to have media-free times like playtimes, family dinners, etc. should not include screens. And I think one of the recurrent themes that we discuss, and I discuss repetitively in this presentation, is that we need to engage in selecting and co-viewing media with our children. And we need to discuss with them online safety. There are new concepts now in our online citizenship, namely cyberbullying, other issues with online safety that we need to introduce our children to, because they are getting exposed to it, whether we like it or not, and we need them to be aware and vigilant about it, and we need them to feel comfortable coming to us and talking to us if they have any issues with that. So again and again, we need to be very mindful, and we need to know what they're watching so that we can protect them best. I'm going to pause for just a second to check one of the questions maybe that was sent by our attendees. So it says, I'm a freelance translator and I work at varying times of the day. If my kid sees me working at night on my bed, for example, what would be the approach to such matter? That's a good point. And then another question, how about daily screen-free family time, and at which age should we give phones to children? Okay, so these are all great questions. Maybe what I'll do is I'll finish with the presentation so that we can have more time to discuss the questions, and then I'll get back to this question, because these are general questions that are pertinent to, I believe, a lot of our attendees as well. So moving on, what do we do with people who are 13 years and older? And I think that applies as well to us, Dr. Talib, so that applies to adults as well. Having said that, the American Academy of Pediatrics is more interested in children and adolescents, but the recommendations here, I think, go for all age groups. So again, at this age group, there is no 1 hour or one time. It's recommended that they use it less than 4 hours per day screen time, but you need to set a time, and that time may vary from one adolescent to the other. Again, you need to set a family media use plan, similar to the recommendations we just mentioned for the age before. Make sure to emphasize physical activity, good sleep, no screens before bedtime. Don't multitask while doing entertainment media. Have media-free times, media-free zones, and then watch as well what your adolescent, although they're older now, they're still at risk for being bullied or for being abused online, and we have to be very careful about those. So we've been talking about the family media use plan, and this is basically, it's an online forum that allows you to go in, put in the child's name or any name you want to put in, the age of the child, and then it walks you through a set of steps to set up a media use plan. And it's an easy application or online form that you can, it's a free access, you can go in and use it. And definitely that works maybe more for, that was designed for US citizens and US children, but I think most of the concepts still apply for our population as well. And it can be found at www.healthychildren.org/media use plan. One thing I want to emphasize is that we need to be a role model for our children, and that can be harder depending on what type of jobs we tend to do. And sometimes I think we need to explain to our children why our job may have necessitated us doing certain things that we agreed should not be done. Although I think inconsistencies need to be minimized to the max. And we need to think each on his own or each independently, how can we all adhere to the rules that we set for the entire home. So when I have kids come visit me, so we have like the kid has 2 or 3 siblings, and it's not allowed that the other siblings can watch screens indefinitely, and only that sibling will have a limited screen time. So we need to make sure to homogenize the plan, to make sure the entire family can stick to the plan and can follow that plan. So we're nearing the end of our presentation. So in conclusion, what can I do as a parent? What's my job as a parent in this digital age with lots of screens present? How can I control things? And as we saw, we just had the first question, and the issues that were suggested or that were questioned are very pertinent and are very relevant and important issues. And I think most of us struggle with something similar to what has been suggested or questioned. So it's very important to be a role model as screen use. It's very hard to convince your kids not to use screens during dinner time when you're holding your phone and just spending all the time on the phone. So we need to be careful. We need to be mindful of that, and we need to, as much as possible, catch ourselves doing it. I'm not definitely at fault. I'm not innocent of using my screen during sometimes dinner or while sitting with my son. The good thing is that I have a 9.5-month-old kid who makes sure to scream whenever he sees me watching or holding my phone. So he kind of reminds me, no, it's not time for you to hold your phone. And even when I get calls, sometimes it can be hard and I have to go to another room because he's not very happy with me using the phone. I'm sure this will change in a couple of years and we'll have the opposite argument maybe. But so you can tell that we all face such challenges, but it's important to try to remind ourselves to make sure that we set the right model, a role model for our kids. We definitely need to keep track of how much media use our children are having and the content of the media, knowing what they are watching. We need to set rules. We need to set guidelines. It's just one other thing, like you set rules for what can and cannot be done. Curfew, when should they be back home? When should they do what friends or what families they can visit, etc. This is a big thing, and we need to set rules and guidelines for it, being it a media use plan or some other form of regulations that we set and you have everybody stick to. And we need to discuss the content of the media with children regularly. So sometimes it's better to try to co-view with them, but that's not always feasible. So what you need to do is what they've watched, let's say a movie, you can ask them, okay, so what did you watch? And what did you learn from that movie? And what were things that you didn't like about the movie? What were things that you liked? So you can have a conversation as a family based on something that they watched. And then sometimes it's helpful if there are advertisements that are being broadcasted as well, to discuss with them the meanings of these advertisements. Marketing can be a very strong factor, and many kids may want to buy or engage in certain practices based on the advertisements that they watch. So we have to be careful about that and try as well to discuss whenever possible the content of these media. And we need to find alternative activities for children. So if they cannot watch, if they have only 1 or 2 hours of screen time, that means you have like probably 10 more hours that you need to find activities for them. And definitely school can take a chunk of that time when there's school, but then there's summertime, there are vacations. And that's why it's important to have sports, physical activities, drawing, painting, reading, setting alternative activities that children agree to and that you have a plan. Maybe they'll help a little bit with the house chores. So you need to find some other activities to engage your children besides screens. And that's much easier said than done, actually. We'll have to think a lot about what we can engage them with. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening. And I actually purposefully did not want to have a lot of slides so that we can have some more time to discuss your questions or your concerns, because I know that's a very hot topic, that's a very concerning topic maybe, and that's a very common topic that a lot may be facing, and they may have some questions about. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the share screen now, and I will be attending to the questions that we get through chat. Okay, so we have a couple questions. I want to try to, sorry, 1 second. Okay, so we'll start with the first question that I read. So that was about the freelance translator and working varying times of the day. And so if my kid sees me working at night on my bed, for example, what would be the approach to such a matter? So what I would recommend is try to avoid him seeing you work at night on the bed if possible. So if you can delay your work until the kid has slept, or if you could have a designated place, either like a small office, even though it may be in your bedroom, because that's the only option you have, preferably not in the bedroom, and let him know that you're still working. So kind of making sure to give him the emphasis that the bed is only used for sleeping and not for working or watching or doing other stuff. I think that would be the best approach I would suggest. How about daily screen-free family time? That's amazing. I mean, that is ideal if we can have, like, we can agree on, let's say, 1 hour in the afternoon where we all sit together and we discuss something together, or maybe we play a board game together, or maybe we go hiking together. So definitely daily screen-free family time is amazing, and that's one of the things that the American Academy of Pediatrics advocates and recommends. And then, and please feel free to have follow-up questions in case you feel you want to give your input or feedback. At what age should we give phones to children? I wish I knew the answer to that. That's a struggle for every parent, I guess. And I don't think there's a set age. There's not like a recommended age whereby you can give phones to children. I think that it depends on the maturity of the child and why you want them to have phones. So if you're worried about their safety or security, and they tend to have schools, let's say, that are far away, or they have to ride to school, and you're worried and you want to check on them, maybe you want to get them phones earlier. But I would say I would rather not get my kids phones before they're like above 10, is my guess. Having said that, in a couple of years, maybe we'll see that children get phones a lot earlier. So I think that's a little bit hard to answer, but I also welcome input from other attendees. There's another question. In the post-pandemic era, it is expected that students will be more exposed to screens as they'll be requested to carry out most of their different duties online. What would you advise schools and teachers to cope with this situation? So that's a great question. And actually, all the questions have been really amazing and a little bit challenging as well. I think that's a very correct statement. I think a lot of our work is probably going to shift to be online, and a lot of students' work as well. We need to be careful about that. We need to advise schools and teachers to be careful about the amount of screens that kids are exposed to. And but the thing is, we want to differentiate a little bit between using the media or screens for educational purposes versus using it mostly for entertainment. So most of the recommendations that you saw from the AAP have to do with entertainment. Okay, so how much screens you use for entertainment and not exactly for education, although that is a growing problem, using more and more screens and media for education. And I think that could cause certain problems, because kids, if they spend a lot of time sedentary, that can affect their weight. They can become overweight or obese, or they can have eye strains, maybe neck strains, musculoskeletal issues. So I think it's something that needs to be considered. Maybe some things can be done online and some things can be done in the classroom, but that's definitely an important concept that we need to all think about, not only in Lebanon, but I think around the world as well. Then there was another comment, and I'm going in the order that I got these comments. So I suggest that you call on school principals and educational partners to attend such webinars as this, because otherwise they will not agree with teachers or parents as to the bad side effects of much exposure to screens. I think that's a good point, but as I mentioned, we are more concerned, and studies have really focused more on the use of media for entertainment and not for education. So usually studies that have looked into educational use of screens, there weren't a lot of issues except for some minor issues, but I think the amount of screen exposure may be increasing tremendously even in education, and we need to be careful and we need to be careful about this problem and maybe think about it a little bit more. Okay. Okay, so sure. So I'm gonna just take 1 second, and I wanna get the link for the. I wanna paste it now before I forget the video link. So it's a YouTube link. I'm just gonna. Okay, here we go. So I hope you all get it. Okay. So okay, I'm not sure if I can send anything actually. Let me see if I'm able to send stuff. So I'm not sure I can send it to you, but oh no, probably I can. Here we go. I think you got it. So that's the link of the video. Now, another question or comment. I have a brother who's 16 years old, and during quarantine, his screen time has increased greatly. He stays playing video games on his PC for approximately 4 hours straight, and that is disregarding the use of his phone or binge watching Netflix. I would like to know in what way can I approach him to lessen his screen time, or how it can be minimized. So that's a very pertinent question and very relevant question to, I think, a lot of parents now. And I have kids come see me for different issues, kids who have headaches or seizures, they come to see me and follow up during the quarantine, and I have the same, and I always hear these complaints. So one thing is to make sure you do the discussion with, you sit with them and you do the discussion about why you think they shouldn't be exposed that much to screen time. I think having them watch a video like the video I showed you may be one way to get him introduced to why he should be careful about screen time. Sometimes I feel that children, especially 16-year-olds, tend to kind of want to defy their family, their siblings, their family. So maybe if you have a primary care physician or a pediatrician, when you go for your annual checkup, maybe you can raise this issue and have them discuss side effects of excessive screen time. And then I think you might want to try to go in online together and check this family media use plan and try to set a time. Okay, so how can we, I know you're bored, I know you need to watch some Netflix, I know you need to watch some video games. How can we make a plan? Can we set a plan and then maybe try to insert some family time, some hiking time, some other activity time? That is what I would recommend. Having said that, this is not easy. You're not doing something, this is not easy to do. It's very hard to change behavior, as you all know. So you want to be gradual, you want to be patient, you don't want to be very confrontational about this issue, and try to get help from other authority figures in the family, maybe to try to get your brother or your children to change their behavior gradually. Another question or comment. I've seen a kid 8 years old who watches Arabic and Turkish series with his parents. I see that is very bad. Would like to know your point of view from a scientific side. Thank you. Okay. So that's a very interesting question. Again, very common thing that I see and I hear about very frequently. And I think it's really tough. So, and I think the problem is with how mature is this 8-year-old, right? And I think no matter how mature they are, the topics that are sometimes tackled in some of these Arabic, Lebanese, Syrian, etc., or Turkish series tend to be a lot advanced for their age or for their maturity or for their understanding. So in theory, it is recommended that they watch more age-appropriate content than these series. I'm not sure there are lots of scientific studies that have looked into particularly that area or that aspect, although that would be a very interesting research question. But there have been studies that looked into having certain advanced content or violent content or fast-paced content. And it has been shown that this has been harmful to kids. It has caused some behavioral issues, some aggressivity. And so ideally, you want to try to avoid such scenarios. Another question, I have an 8-year-old cousin, and I constantly tell him that he should play with games that don't require battery. What are the best ways to make him grow more interested in non-tablet phone games, and is it too late at his age? So, so that's also a good question. So ideally, you want them. You want kids to be interested in board games, maybe whereby you don't have screens in the first place. Maybe develop a hobby, like go learn a little bit about painting, learn a little bit about music, maybe get engaged in a gym or in a certain club. Like I know kids like boxing and martial arts and stuff like that, depending whether he's a male or a female. And then girls like maybe more a little bit, they do like actually martial arts too, but maybe a little bit as well, some dancing or something like that. I think you want to try to play with him, okay? Games that do not require batteries, like board games or so, and make it a family game, so have more than one family member get engaged. If they have somebody in the family whom they look up to and whom they like, you want to have them be involved in this type of behavior, so that they would be more encouraged to change their behavior. I don't think it's too late at this stage, but you want to do it slowly, gently, but you want to persevere and try to kind of go back again and again, so that you can encourage him to play such types of games. Okay. Now, I want to make sure that I don't have any other. Okay, so I have some more questions going on. So, so yeah, one of the questions is, as online learning is a must, is it considered screen time? As we mentioned, screen time that we are focusing on here, and that the research has shown that it can be problematic is if excessive is the entertainment screen time and not the online learning one. Okay. And I agree that limiting the time for online learning is sometimes not an option. The only good thing about online learning is that most of the times you don't have to do it at one setting, or sitting. So meaning that if you have, and I'm not sure about how schools are doing it in Lebanon these days, but most of the time, let's assume I'm enrolling in an online course, I have the flexibility of doing a portion of it, having some rest for my eyes, for my neck, maybe doing some stretches, etc., and then come back and complete it. So that's the nice thing about some of the online courses or online education versus entertainment, whereby you tend to be hooked. You want to finish a game, you want to finish a movie, you're spending now 4 or 5 hours in a row, you cannot leave your screen. I think that's where it's a little bit more challenging. Another question, is there nowadays any mention of screen addiction in the screen-related literature, and what are the suggested remedies? So that's a great question, actually. There are people who are mentioning the concept of screen addiction, because we know that when you do something that you feel is giving you some rewards, there's a lot of dopamine and serotonin that gets secreted, and so that's a concept that's being suggested. And I'm not sure there are yet very well-defined remedies, except for talking to to behavioral therapists, sometimes talking to specialists about how to decrease screen use, but I'm not sure, I'm not aware, to tell you the truth, of any centers whereby you go in and you just clear your addiction for screens. But I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes more of a serious issue as we go on, and maybe we will have some more some really remedies that stand out. Another question, and I noticed that my 12-year-old twins lost some of their concentration after spending many long hours on TikTok, especially when I asked them specific tasks and they were unable to memorize well. I deleted their apps 2 weeks ago and now they are back on track. And I think that's something many of us may have noticed or many of us have experienced. So excessive use of screen time, whether in younger children or older children, can actually influence with their concentration abilities. And so sometimes we need to be careful, and we need to keep an eye on that. As I mentioned before, I tend to see in my clinic kids who come to see me because they're concerned that there could be autism in the kid because he's not talking yet, they're not answering questions, they're not establishing good eye contact, and many times in the history there is this mention of excessive TV use or tablet use, and sometimes all I ask the family to do is to stop all screens and give the kid a few weeks monitor period and to come back and see me. And sometimes, not in all cases, you can see a tremendous improvement once you've stopped screens in these kids. They start interacting better, smiling, looking better, establishing better eye contact, etc. Is studying online Zoom meetings also included in the 2-hour recommended time for adolescents? So I would not include studying in the recommended time for adolescents. Okay. Having said that, I mean, if you're studying a lot and then you want to do still the 2-hour recommended time, then you have to be careful about how much time you're spending overall in front of the screen. How can we convince the adolescent not to put his cell phone in his bedroom at night? So that's a great question. We need to agree, all of us, to keep our cell phones outside bedrooms. Okay, so have a charging station, a central charging station in the home, whereby all phones get charged there, okay, including your phone. And what you can do is have the charging station closer to your room so that you can hear your cell phone ring in case you expect calls or emergencies. That is one suggestion. Sometimes, no matter what you do, you cannot convince them, and that can be a challenge. So that's where you want to have a doctor talk to them, their doctor talk to them, or somebody they trust or they like. Okay. Any tips to help control screen time and content when the child is with his cousins, friends, aunts, or grandfathers in the absence of the parents? Thank you very much for that question. Actually, that's a great point that I have missed to mention. Once you set a protocol or guidelines for your family, it is important to share those with friends, close friends, with cousins, and with grandparents so that they know what you want your kid to get. Because if they do not know, they will try to give the kid whatever they want and however time they want. So it's very important to share these regulations. So if I agreed with my kid that they can only have 2 hours of screen time a day, and I'm not there that day and they're with their grandparents, I want the grandparents to know that that's the amount of time that they're allowed to spend on screens. I'm sorry if you mentioned this before, but were the effects of screen time on less than 3-year-old observed in comparative studies? I mean, were toddlers compared to peers not exposed to screens at all? Yes, there were comparative studies, and it was shown that toddlers not exposed to screens, especially less than 1.5 years, tended to have faster acquisition of words and language. Can you suggest an ideal daily program that can be set for a 5-year-old child during summer vacation? I wish there were ideal daily programs, but maybe, I mean, so I would suggest something, but that it may not apply to your kid or to your schedule or to your work. So it's very important that you set your own schedule, but maybe it will include having them go for some activity, go for a swim, some screen time maybe, and then visiting grandparents if that's feasible. But then again, that depends on where you're staying, how feasible it is for you to move around from one place to the other. So really setting the schedule is something you need, is something very individual and very specific for everyone. I think there are a couple more questions, but I think we ran out of time maybe. So But I think we have answered most of these questions. There were a couple more questions that came later on, but I think, Dr. Talib, we have to stop.
Well, if there are actually short questions that you'd like to answer them very quickly, I don't have a problem. We can give you 1 more minute. Yalla, go for it.
Okay. Okay. I have an out of the subject question, but related to bad kid behavior. Please let me know if I can ask you now. If you don't mind, I can. If you can mind, I can. I think there's in the instructions you get. There's an email that you can send your questions to, and so please, for that question about the bad kid behavior, maybe you can email it because we don't have a lot of time. How can I convince a 12-year-old to get off the screen while she's pressured by her school friends to use the internet? So very important, very tough question. Peer pressure is a big thing, very big thing. I think that's probably the biggest struggle you have as a parent. So why do I need to not watch screens when my friends can watch screen anytime? Something I get all the time in clinic as well. You need to just be consistent about it. The same way you set rules and you have them abide by what time they should be back from at night or whatever, from a party or something, you need to be consistent with that. And they will hate you a little bit for it, but you need to persevere gently and consistently as much as possible. Sometimes you want to let go and you don't want to win every single small battle with your kids, but you need to be consistent in the big picture. Any tips to control screen time and content when the child is with his spouse? I think we answered that. So I think most of the questions I hope will be answered. Can we insert Dr. Talib the email to which they can send the questions?
Yes. Do you want to put your email ولا شو بدك تحطي which email?
The email that was suggested, the CE, the continuing education.
About continuing education, هلا hopefully Alan or Sharbel عم بيسمعونا. If they are, please go ahead, guys, and type in the continuing education email بالchat box so everybody can actually have it. And in the meantime, Abeer, I want to thank you for this session, for this 1 hour. Small like you're quite quick be answering all the questions. يعني لاحظت for the past 15 minutes or so, I think you managed to handle something like 50 questions plus or so. So that was quite insightful as well. And hopefully what you taught us about handling our children in terms of طفلهم اوقاتهم على هالسكرينز بركي بنقدر نطبقهم على حالنا كمان. بعتقد البروبلم nowadays مش بس الاولاد، يمكن اكثر من الاولاد as well. So I want to thank you once again and thank everybody as well for actually taking part of today's session. لا تنسوا بكره guys again عنا 2 sessions على 5:30. We're going to be talking about the socio-economic impact after COVID-19, and at 4 o'clock we have Dr. Zaina Tannous, one of our own from the hospital as well, who will be talking about too much sun. يعني from too much screen اليوم لبكره too much sun. So I think he did not provide the there we go, ee@leu.edu.lb. Okay, so in the meantime guys, thank you very much to Abeer one more time. Thank you Laeli for hosting and presenting.
Thank you all for listening. Have a good evening.
Have a lovely evening everyone.